Hi everyone, my name is Katrin Hepworth, and this is my final project for my media project for TESP 302. We'll be talking about the different ways that you can teach to your students and their individual exceptionalities in your current or future classroom. We will be applying the principles of universal design for learning, as well as my favorite thing, differentiated instruction. Without further ado, why don't we get started? So we're going to be focusing first on learning disabilities, things like dyslexia, loss of memory, social emotional issues, which could lead to a short attention span, difficulty with writing, or even coordination problems. So dyslexia, as many of you probably already know, is a disorder in which some letters might not work. They don't work, honestly. Things might flip in a child's brain, they might be written backwards, they just don't make sense. It's really hard for these kids. Memory issues. You could forget something that was said just 5 minutes ago, maybe 10 minutes ago. It is not a weakness, it is just a difference. So how can you help students like this? Read aloud. Really, really simplistic, I'm going to tell you. Read aloud to them. If a child has a problem with reading, they can hear it and read it on the page. It makes sense. It helps with a full learning, a full-bodied learning. They're able to hear and see and maybe speak it out. That can help them a lot. You can assign group projects so that maybe their problem doesn't seem like such a big deal when somebody else is reading it aloud to them, and they can still have their input and they can still be a very valued member of a group. You could use graphic or advanced organizers. You can teach organization, or my favorite thing is just to get to know your students as individuals. We're going to move on to our next portion, which is communication and speech disorders. These can include lisps, it could include stutters, it can include pretty much anything that presents as a problem with communication. Articulation, substitution, additions, omission, distortion, or even fluency disorder. Just so that you know, and I'm sure you probably already noticed, I will not be hitting on every single thing on every single list, just for time's sake. So you're going to have students that will not be able to speak correctly. I have a student who cannot open her mouth fully, and she stutters and slurs her speech when she is speaking. And it was at first incredibly embarrassing for her to speak in front of the class. But through encouragement, I was able to show her that it doesn't matter, that I still value what she has to say, and doesn't matter to me if she has a speech impediment or not. Probably because I had a speech impediment as a kid too. How can you help? Just like I said, encouragement is the most amazing tool in the classroom. Be an encouraging teacher, guys. That's your job. Assign a partner, somebody who can help encourage them, somebody who can explain things to them or be their voice, or help them say words slower or explain things to them in a way that they understand. Request help from a speech language pathologist. Limit the vocabulary in your materials if a child has problems with understanding larger vocabulary, whether it is an ESL student or a student that is an exchange student. Give them a partner. Use smaller vocabulary. Don't assign an 8th grade word to a 1st grader. Sometimes use the simplest of English to explain a concept to your students. Sounds pretty easy, right? You can use audio and text simultaneously if they have problems with reading but not with listening. That solves it. If they have problems with listening but not reading, hey, use as many pictures as you possibly can. Pictures are great. Just as you can see from my PowerPoint presentation, you like to see pictures. It would be boring without it, right? Let's move on to hearing loss. We normally just say deaf, but deafness does not actually refer to complete deafness only. It can also refer to partial deafness or deafness in one ear. It can present itself through delayed speech. Maybe you don't realize that your child or your student has hearing problems until you realize that they have a slurred speech. They have problems with communication, or they have waited until they're 3 years old to say their first word. It is different for every single person because we are all individuals. So, how can you help a child that has partial or complete hearing loss? Great question. You can use an amplification system, something like speakers or something a little more expensive, or even some teachers in the school that I work at, we have a headpiece that we wear, and we can speak into a microphone and a little box at our hips, and it projects the noise. It also saves your throat. Dear goodness, the amount of times that I have had throat issues from speaking loud enough for all of the children in my classroom. And I don't have any children who are hard of hearing. So I can imagine what it's like for a teacher that has a student that is hard of hearing. You can use closed caption technology. Subtitles are incredible. You can work with their speech language pathologist. You can have visual representation, pictures on everything. I think that's the answer to everything. Pictures, videos, and text used all the time. That also helps with visual, kinesthetic, and audio learners. One of the most important things that I think is not addressed enough is facing your students while you are teaching. Don't turn your back to them and speak. That excludes people. That's simplistic, right? Next thing is emotional and behavioral disorders. These are things that you will find in your classroom no matter how old your students are, and it will be a struggle for a lot of them for their entire lives. It's not always obvious what is going on. So these can include anxiety, mood disorders, aggression, in some cases schizophrenia. There will possibly be conduct disorder, and they might even end up not performing well academically. It also would include depression. A lot of these things are differences in their personality, or their, not even just their personality, but their disposition. They might have intense aggression over things that are not actually a big deal, but it's incredibly important to them. Or they feel anxiety over something that a lot of people wouldn't feel anxious over. For example, I have had a student who is anxious standing up and singing or saying a word in my English class. And the other students, they're fine being singled out and standing up and speaking. But my other students would have a panic. One of my students would have a panic attack whenever I would try to call on him. I learned not to call on him after a while just to respect his personal boundaries. But how are you going to help these children in the long run? There are behavioral tracking apps which you can use to write out what they have done, what triggers them, what they are doing throughout the day, and that can help them really visualize and understand what's going on. Inform the classroom on consent. Let the children around the child who has the behavioral difference, let them be the ones that say, hey, I'm not comfortable with you speaking to me that way. Please don't do that. Don't encourage them to have positive reinforcement. You as a teacher are to lead that charge in being a polite and kind person. When you say the word no, teach your students as a group how to say no in a way that is not mean and not to bully someone. And especially when you have a child that has a panic attack, teach the entire classroom on how to treat such a thing happening. Simplistic enough, right? So ADHD, or ADD, attention deficit disorder. This could be impulsiveness, it can be inattentiveness, it could be a mixture of the two, which is known as combined. So they will possibly have trouble with their concentration skills. They might have difficulty planning or not be able to sit very still. How do you help these students? Teach organization! Modify the classroom. Could be flexible seating, could be just a way to modify. Have the student in a spot that works for them. If they need to stand up, give them the end seat so they can stand up and stand next to the classroom. Set reachable goals. Give them something to rejoice over when they complete it. So that they can have, every 5 minutes, have a goal they've reached. That resets that clock for their inattentiveness. Resets it, and now they're on goal number 2. Flexible seating is another really great way of doing it. If they need to sit in a ball and bounce while they're reading, let them do that. Intellectual disorders could include memory impairments, could include Down syndrome, difficulty thinking or understanding. It could lead to a lack of motivation or a short attention span. Memory impairments could include things like forgetting something that just happened, or possibly something that happened yesterday, the day before. How can you help them with all of these intellectual disorders? You can use an e-reader. E-readers are beautiful things. They can help with tapping on something and reading, they might need something they can hold. Keep an agenda, give rewards constantly, give them something to smile about. Let them understand that their learning is great because they are learning for them. Autism is a spectrum. Again, everyone is an individual. It's known as autism spectrum disorder. Now includes Asperger's syndrome. It presents social issues. They might have trouble paying attention, and they might have problems with their language skills. It's a lot for these kids. So you can limit group activities so that they're not forced into being in a social setting, and their differences are not as apt to be teased or made fun of. You can encourage them beforehand when they're younger how to interact with other children. But group projects really exasperate a child that has Asperger's or autism disorder because they're not prepared for that. So instead, encourage them and let them do solo work. Relate activities to a child's interest or use mnemonic strategies. Let's move on to physical disabilities. Includes loss of limb function, asthma, cerebral palsy, loss of limb movement. For example, my younger brother has polio. He can't walk very well. He has braces. How would a teacher help him? You can have a limit of strong sense. This also, I think, physical disabilities also includes asthma. So limiting use of strong sense would help them with breathing. Not having a class pet, that also is good for a child that has asthma or allergies. Implement flexible seating for children who are unable to sit in the seats that are provided. Give them a different way to sit. If the child has a wheelchair, give them a spot to put their wheelchair. Let's move on to the next one. Blindness, limited vision, or complete loss of vision. It can result in poor academic performance, comprehension problems, or even loss of attention. Kids get bored if they don't understand what's going on. What do? Use larger text. Provide auditory sources. Let them be able to go home and listen to the lesson again. Don't just give them a textbook, give them an audiobook. Limit the obstacles so they're not bumping into things in the classroom, and use clear pathways. Traumatic brain injuries could happen when a child falls at a young age, could happen based off of a car accident. Pretty much anything that damages the brain traumatically is a traumatic brain injury. It can lead to emotional issues, memory issues, social issues, slurred or halted speech, and even attention issues. How do you help that? How do you help these kids? You can limit distractions. You can give adequate processing times. You can give spaces for them to process. Give them a little bit of extra time to understand and comprehend what is going on. You can give frequent feedback. Constantly monitoring, remind them, giving them frequent responses, giving appropriate pacing so they're comprehending things correctly. For a gifted child, somebody who has insanely high intelligence, would have an exceptional classroom performance. They'd be a rapid learner. They have very long attention spans, and they could get very bored if your classes are not challenging enough. So challenge the child. Work with gifted teachers. Work with teachers that know how to handle this exceptionality. Keep the student on task. Sometimes they have to do the boring stuff that are in their minds beneath them. It helps build character. Just like for a child that has a learning disability, it's also good to face things that are difficult, just so they can understand and gauge where they are. And give curriculum extension. That's a way to modify or add on to a curriculum to help challenge a gifted child. Now that we've gone through all of these and all of the ways that you can help these students, I hope you feel a little bit more prepared when you walk into your classroom one day. So thank you everyone for watching. Bye!